The Zilvrak Dominion's flagship, Vorashka, hovered in high orbit over Earth, its massive form blotting out the stars. Inside, Supreme Warlord Zurich loomed over the holomap, slitted eyes narrowing as his claws tapped against the metal surface. Deploy the first wave. Flatten their cities. Send a message. A subordinate bowed deeply, his armored plates clinking as he activated the command sequence. From the viewport, streaks of red-hot fire caught through the atmosphere. The invasion had begun. Zurich sneered. These humans, these soft-skinned bipeds, had been a joke across the stars for centuries. Their world was primitive, their weapons archaic. It would be a massacre. But deep beneath the Earth's surface, in a hardened war bunker, Colonel Adrian Voss stood before a glowing tactical display, his hands clasped behind his back. His sharp, calculating gaze studied the enemy formations as alarms blared throughout the underground compound. They finally showed up, he muttered, cracking his knuckles. A junior officer gulped. Orders, sir. Voss exhaled sharply. We let them land. Then we kill every last one of them. The Zilvrak drop pods slammed into the surface with deafening thunderclaps, their hulls hissing as the doors peeled open. Towering reptilian warriors, clad in biometallic armor, stepped forward with predatory grace, their energy rifles humming with barely contained destruction. Their commander, a hulking brute named Karash, bared his fangs in a feral grin. Burn this world to the ground. The first human city fell within hours. Streets ran red with blood, buildings crumbled under orbital bombardments, and terrified civilians were rounded up like cattle. The Zilvrak moved with merciless efficiency, gunning down resistance cells with cold precision. And yet, something was wrong. The second city was empty. No resistance. No civilians. Just silence. Karash snarled, eyes scanning the eerily abandoned metropolis. Cowards. Hiding in their holes. A scout approached hesitantly. Commander, our sensors are detecting motion. But we see nothing. A deep, guttural laugh rumbled from Karash's throat. Fools. Their fear is so great, they crawl in the shadows like insects. Then the lights flickered. A low, almost inhuman growl echoed from the rooftops. And then, the slaughter began. The first Zilvrak soldier's head exploded, a single sniper round turning his skull into vapor. The second warrior screamed as something unseen yanked him into the darkness, his cries cut short by a wet, sickening crunch. The third was ripped in half, his torso flung from the rooftops, his lower body still standing for a horrifying moment before collapsing into the blood-soaked street. Karash's blood ran cold. This wasn't war. This was a hunt. Ambush. Take cover. It was too late. The air filled with whizzing projectiles, explosions ripping through their ranks, human shadows moving like wraiths between the ruined buildings. The Zilvrak were the apex predators of the galaxy, but here, on this forsaken planet, they were prey. A voice crackled through their stolen comms, cold and merciless. Welcome to Earth. Karash's eyes widened, then his skull caved in as a combat knife plunged through the base of his spine, severing his central nervous system. Colonel Voss ripped the blade free, letting the alien corpse slump forward. He kicked the body aside like garbage, then turned to his squad, their rifles smoking. Push forward. No prisoners. Across the city, the human forces moved like shadows, their tactics surgical, their precision lethal. They had no advanced tech, no energy shields, no exosuits. What they had was something far deadlier. Adaptation. Ruthlessness. A complete and utter disregard for the rules of war. They didn't fight for glory. They didn't fight for honor. They fought to exterminate. A Zilvrak warrior clawed at his throat, gasping for air, his body convulsing violently. Voss watched, unimpressed. That's cyanide gas, you scaly bastard. You'll be dead in 10 seconds. The alien collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Voss reloaded. The Zilvrak retreat was frantic, disorganized. Their elite troops were reduced to mindless beasts, scrambling for survival in a war they never saw coming. Back aboard the flagship, Supreme Warlord Zurich slammed his claws against the control panel. He had seen planetary resistance before, but nothing like this. His forces weren't being defeated. They were being butchered. Status report. A terrified officer stammered, "Sir, the humans are." The transmission cut out. Static. And then, a voice. Deep. Cold. Unrelenting. "Zurich. You're next." The Supreme Warlord froze, a foreign sensation creeping into his gut. Something his species hadn't felt in centuries. Fear. Because now, he understood. The humans hadn't just been fighting to defend their planet. They had been waiting. And they had been planning. Zurich's slitted eyes darted to the viewport, to the battlefield below. What had once been an invasion had turned into a graveyard. His graveyard. Earth wasn't just a death world. It was a trap. Zurich's claws gripped the edges of the holomap, the dim red glow of the war table casting ominous light over his scarred face. The battlefield report scrolled in front of him, flashing alerts one after another. Lost battalions. Vanishing squads. Radio silence. Wiped out command posts. Entire platoons erased from existence within hours of landing. This was not war. This was something else. Impossible, he growled. This world is unarmed, primitive. Their defenses are non-existent. Why are my warriors dying? A voice crackled through the comms, but it wasn't one of his officers. It was human. Cold. Amused. You thought you were the hunters, the voice said. Now you're the hunted. Then the signal cut out. Zurich felt something he had never felt before in his long, blood-soaked career. Dread. He turned to his tactical officer, eyes burning with fury. Find out where that transmission came from. And burn it. The officer hesitated. Sir, our signal relays, they've been repurposed. Zurich's stomach turned. Explain. The officer swallowed hard. They're using our own comms against us. They're inside our network. A slow realization crept over the bridge crew. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were inside their systems, inside their war machines, inside their heads. Zurich slammed his fist onto the console. Deploy the Omega Beasts. Now. Across the ruined cityscape, metal pods crashed into the ground, releasing monstrous, cybernetic war beasts, Zilvrak creations bred for planetary slaughter. Towering reptilian monsters reinforced with biosteel plating, their claws could rip through tank armor, their laser-laced eyes reducing buildings to rubble. They were walking engines of death. For a moment, the battlefield went still. Humanity had never faced these creatures before. Then the beasts began their rampage, roaring as they carved through human fortifications. Bodies shredded. Vehicles torn apart like paper. Screams filled the air. Adrian Voss watched from atop a fallen skyscraper, sniper rifle balanced against his shoulder. His expression didn't change. He keyed his comms. They finally let the big dogs out. A voice on the other end, gruff, amused. Guess it's time to put him down. Voss switched frequencies. Team Alpha, you're up. Miles away, deep underground, a hidden bunker came to life. Lights flickered. Screens displayed targets. A dozen elite operatives, all clad in urban camo, checked their weapons. One of them, a man built like a tank, cracked his knuckles. About damn time. Another, a woman with cybernetic implants, loaded a grenade launcher. I was getting bored. Voss's voice crackled through the comms. Show them why they should have stayed in orbit. The Omega Beasts had never been defeated in battle. Until now. The first one, a towering brute of claws and muscle, thundered through a human barricade, sending bodies flying. It let out a victorious roar, just as a high-velocity explosive round tore through its skull, splattering brain matter across the pavement. A sniper round. One shot. One kill. The beast collapsed mid-charge, its massive bulk shaking the ground. The second beast whipped its head around, eyes flaring red, searching for the shooter. That's when the EMP mines detonated. The street lit up with arcs of electricity, frying the beast's cybernetic implants, blinding it, rendering it into a flailing, howling mess. Then the humans swarmed. Rocket launchers fired in perfect synchronization, blowing off its limbs, piece by piece. The creature screamed, but it didn't die fast. Humans didn't give quick deaths to invaders. The third beast tried to retreat, realizing the tide had turned. But retreat wasn't an option. Because that's when the drones came. A swarm of micro-drones, each the size of a fist, filled the sky like a cloud of angry wasps. They targeted weak points, eye sockets, joints, exposed flesh. The Omega beast shrieked as the tiny machines tore through its skull, digging into its brain, shutting it down from the inside. Within 10 minutes, every last Omega beast was dead. Voss sighed, watching through his rifle scope. That was disappointing. The Zilvrak warlords had spent centuries perfecting those beasts. The humans had killed them like farm animals. He keyed his comms. Advanced to Phase 2. The next step in the plan began. Across the battlefield, Zilvrak warships started falling from the sky. Not from human weapons. Not from ground defenses. From sabotage. Human operatives, having infiltrated the Zilvrak command centers, had overridden ship controls. They had planted viruses inside the Dominion's own AI systems. Now, the warships were crashing into each other, their engines frying, their targeting systems locking onto friendly units. Inside the flagship, Zurich's eyes bulged in disbelief. He turned to his officer, voice a barely restrained snarl. "Our fleet is tearing itself apart." The officer's face was pale. "Sir, we lost control of the command matrix. The humans, they..." Zurich grabbed the officer by the throat. "Get it back." The officer struggled for air. We can't." Zurich threw him aside, his chest heaving. His forces were in chaos. The humans hadn't just outfought them, they had outthought them. They hadn't just defended their world, they had turned the invasion into a massacre. Then, a final transmission hijacked every screen on the warship. Adrian Voss, sitting casually in a commandeered Zilvrak control room, smiled at the camera. "You know," he said, leaning forward, "I thought you guys were supposed to be good at war." He twirled a combat knife between his fingers. "Instead, you're getting your asses handed to you by a bunch of primitive bipeds. Kinda embarrassing, don't you think?" Zurich roared, slamming his fist into the console, shattering it. Voss didn't flinch. "I know what you're thinking. We still have the fleet. But here's the thing." He tapped a button. Outside, the largest Zilvrak dreadnought spontaneously detonated. The explosion rippled through orbit, a shockwave tearing through their already failing warships. Voss smiled, slow and cruel. "Not anymore." The transmission cut out. The bridge of the Vorashka fell deathly silent. Zurich stared at the carnage outside. Hundreds of ships burning. His warriors dying by the thousands. His invasion turning into a rout. He was losing. Not just this battle. The war. And for the first time in his life, Zurich understood what it meant to be prey. Zurich's breath was heavy, his claws gripping the railing of the command bridge so tightly that the metal groaned under the pressure. The holomap showed the brutal reality of the battlefield below. Red blips, representing his once mighty invasion force, were vanishing at an alarming rate. His warships, which once darkened the skies with their sheer numbers, were burning, falling, disintegrating into the atmosphere like dying embers. This wasn't war. This was slaughter. His officers stood frozen, eyes flickering between the screens and their supreme warlord. No one spoke. No one dared. Then, the main screen flickered to life, and the image that filled it made Zurich's blood run cold. Adrian Voss. Seated in a dimly lit room, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a commandeered war console, Voss looked bored. He ran a gloved hand through his short-cropped hair, then gave a lazy, amused grin. "You know, I gotta say, I'm kinda disappointed. I thought you guys were supposed to be warlords. Conquerors. Undefeated. But this?" He gestured toward the battle reports scrolling across the screen. "This is just embarrassing." Zurich's lips peeled back into a snarl. "Human, you are overstepping." "Overstepping?" Voss raised an eyebrow. "Buddy, I'm stomping your entire species into the dirt right now. Overstepping would be letting you leave alive." A ripple of unease spread across the bridge crew. Zurich could feel it. They were losing faith. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. These were warriors who had never known defeat until today. He growled, slamming a fist onto the console. "You dare mock the Zilvrak Dominion? We have conquered worlds. We have broken entire civilizations. We are ancient history." Voss leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The amusement was gone. His expression was something else now. Something dark. Cold. Deadly. "You want to know what your biggest mistake was?" he asked, voice low. "It wasn't underestimating us. It wasn't thinking we were weak." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Your mistake was landing." Zurich opened his mouth to speak, but an explosion rocked the warship, sending tremors through the deck. The lights flickered. The crew stumbled. Emergency sirens blared. One of the officers snapped to attention, panic evident in his voice. "Supreme Warlord. We have breaches in the lower decks. Human forces have infiltrated the ship." Zurich's vision darkened with rage. Impossible. His flagship was the most heavily fortified warship in the fleet. No species had ever. "Oh, right," Voss continued, his voice dripping with mock realization. "I forgot to mention. We're already here." The screen cut out. And then, the screams started. Blaster fire. Shrieks of agony. The unmistakable sound of steel meeting flesh. Zurich turned just in time to see his personal guards collapse, throats slit by unseen assailants. Shadows moved through the smoke-filled corridors, silent and methodical, cutting down his warriors with lethal efficiency. Then, the smoke cleared, and there he was. Adrian Voss. Standing amid the bodies, a combat knife in one hand, a stolen plasma rifle in the other. His eyes locked onto Zurich with a predator's intensity. The bridge crew froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Voss spoke. "You want to talk about history?" He twirled the knife between his fingers, stepping over a fallen Zilvrak officer. "Let me tell you a little story about Earth." Zurich tensed, muscles coiling, ready to strike. Voss kept walking. Slow. Unbothered. Controlled. "See, our planet? It's not like yours. We didn't evolve in peace. We weren't born into the stars with shields and plasma cannons. We clawed our way to the top through fire, through ice, through disease, through extinction-level events. Everything that's ever lived on Earth has either adapted or died." He stopped just a few feet away, gripping the knife tightly. "And guess what? We survived." Zurich roared, lunging forward, claws aimed for Voss's throat. But Voss was faster. A blur of movement. Then pain. White-hot, blinding pain. Zurich staggered back, choking, looking down to see Voss's knife buried deep in his chest. Voss didn't hesitate. He grabbed the warlord by the throat, slamming him against the nearest console. Sparks rained down as the ship lurched violently, alarms screaming around them. "You think your empire means something?" Voss snarled. "It doesn't. Your kind. You're just another footnote in the history of species who thought they could own the galaxy." Zurich choked, black blood spilling from his mouth. His claws dug into Voss's armor, trying desperately to fight back, but there was no strength left. "You landed on the wrong planet," Voss whispered. Then, with one brutal twist, he wrenched the blade free. Zurich let out a final, shuddering breath, then collapsed. Silence. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zilvrak flagship was completely silent. Voss exhaled, wiping his blade on Zurich's cloak. Then he turned to the remaining crew, those who hadn't fled. They were frozen in terror. Unmoving. Voss sheathed his knife. Then, in a tone cold as steel, he said, "Get off my planet." The remaining Zilvrak scrambled for the escape pods, clawing over each other in their desperation to flee. Voss activated his comms. "Command, this is Voss. Warlord is down. Ship is ours. Initiate orbital cleanup." From the surface, human-controlled anti-orbital cannons locked onto the fleeing Zilvrak vessels. And then, one by one, they burned. Humanity hadn't just won. They had ended an empire. Forever. The silence aboard the warship was suffocating. Smoke curled from shattered consoles, sparks crackled from exposed wiring, and the metallic scent of blood mixed with the scorched air. Bodies lay scattered across the bridge, once proud warriors now lifeless husks. The Zilvrak, for all their strength, for all their centuries of conquest, had never experienced true annihilation until now. Adrian Voss adjusted his grip on his rifle, stepping over the corpse of Supreme Warlord Zurich. The war was over. The Dominion's strongest had been shattered, their forces crushed, their will to fight broken. And yet, there was one last thing left to do. A weak, rasping breath sounded from the floor. One of Zurich's high-ranking commanders, Voss, lay slumped against the wall, his golden armor dented and smeared with blood. His reptilian eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held nothing but terror. He clutched a wound at his side, black ichor dripping between his fingers. Voss crouched in front of him, rifle slung over his back, hands resting casually on his knees. "I should kill you," he said, voice calm, matter-of-fact. "But I need you to do something first." Voss swallowed thickly, struggling for words. You have no honor," he hissed, his voice weak. Voss smirked. "Honor?" He gestured to the burning city below, to the smoldering wreckage of Zilvrak warships falling like dying embers. "Your people came here to exterminate us. You don't get to talk about honor." The Zilvrak commander's breath hitched, his wounded chest rising and falling in uneven spasms. We thought you were weak." Voss tilted his head. "Yeah. A lot of people do." Voss winced, a shudder running through his body as pain lanced through him. This is not how wars are fought." Voss chuckled, the sound low and humorless. "See, that's your problem. You expected a war. You expected soldiers marching in formation, honor-bound duels, battle lines drawn in the sand. But this wasn't a war." His smile disappeared, and his voice dropped to something colder. Something final. This was an extermination. The Zilvrak commander's eyes darted around, searching for some escape, some hope, but there was none. His fleet was gone. His armies decimated. His homeworld, soon to be next. "You came here thinking you'd conquer us," Voss continued. "Instead, you taught us something important. You showed us that the galaxy doesn't respect diplomacy. That the only thing out there is who strikes first and who dies screaming." He leaned in, close enough that Voss could feel the weight of his words. "And you just made humanity very, very good at striking first." Voss coughed, black blood dribbling down his chin. What are you going to do?" Voss stood, rolling his shoulders. "Oh, I'm not going to do anything." "You are. You're going to take a message back to whatever remains of your people." The Zilvrak's trembling hands gripped his wound tighter. "A message?" Voss reached into his pocket, pulling out a small data chip. He flipped it between his fingers before tossing it onto Voss's lap. "That contains footage of everything that happened here. Every failure. Every slaughter. Every one of your unstoppable warriors getting torn apart like they were nothing. He crouched again, his voice just above a whisper. You're going to show them. And then, you're going to tell them one thing. Voss struggled to focus. What? Voss's smirk returned, but this time, there was nothing human in it. Tell them we're coming. The Zilvrak commander's breathing hitched. You can't mean. Retreating isn't enough, Voss said, standing up again. We learned that lesson a long time ago. We don't wait for threats to return. We don't let our enemies lick their wounds and try again in a few years. We finish the job. The bridge was eerily silent, save for the occasional flicker of fire and the distant screams of the last survivors being hunted down like animals. Voss shook his head weakly. You don't understand, our people will never surrender. Voss turned, walking toward the exit, his boots crunching against broken glass and blood-streaked metal. Just before he stepped through the door, he glanced back over his shoulder. Neither do we. Then he was gone. Voss stared after him, the data chip in his shaking hands. For the first time in Zilvrak history, his species had learned what it felt like to be afraid. The human fleet, once battered and outgunned, now ascended from the ruins of Earth like specters of vengeance. Stolen Zilvrak warships, now under human control, formed up in orbit, their weapons charged, their courses set. Destination, the heart of the Zilvrak Dominion. Voss stood at the bridge of his newly captured command ship, arms crossed as he stared at the stars beyond. The faces of his crew, hardened, ruthless, ready to burn the Dominion to the ground, watched him, awaiting the order. He exhaled. Then, with a single word, sealed the fate of an empire. Advance. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of the stolen Zilvrak warship, now under human control. Adrian Voss stood at the center, arms folded across his chest, eyes locked on the star map hovering before him. The remnants of Earth's forces, what was left after the invasion, were now something entirely different. They weren't defenders anymore. They were executioners. The crew around him worked with cold precision, checking weapons systems, coordinating fleet movements, preparing for the final strike. This was no longer about survival. It was about making sure the Zilvrak never did this again. Status? Voss asked, voice calm, deliberate. A communications officer, a hardened veteran with a scar running down the side of his face, responded without hesitation. Fleet assembled. We're looking at 200 operational warships, half of them Zilvrak class. Weapons systems primed, propulsion ready. All ships standing by for the final order. Voss nodded. And the Dominion? The officer's fingers tapped rapidly across the console. A projection flickered to life, revealing the Zilvrak homeworld, a massive planet wrapped in layers of orbital defenses, war stations, and patrolling dreadnoughts. A fortress world. The heart of their empire. One of the tacticians muttered under his breath. That's a hell of a fight waiting for us. Voss smirked. We're not fighting. We're ending them. A murmur rippled through the bridge. Every soldier here had lost something, friends, family, their entire way of life. There was no hesitation. No second thoughts. They had learned the lesson the Zilvrak had forced upon them. Mercy was weakness. Mercy got you invaded. Mercy got your cities burned to the ground. That lesson was about to be returned in full. A transmission request flashed across the console. Voss. The Zilvrak commander Voss had spared. Voss tapped the panel, accepting the transmission. The screen filled with the haggard, beaten face of Voss, his scales dulled from exhaustion, his eyes sunken with the weight of knowing what was coming. The background showed the Dominion's War Council, the last surviving warlords gathered in desperate silence. You should not be here, Voss said, voice low. You have already won. Your vengeance has been taken. Voss leaned forward, resting his forearms on the console. Vengeance? He shook his head. This isn't vengeance. This is justice. A murmur ran through the Zilvrak warlords behind Voss. They knew what was coming, but they still couldn't believe it. They had spent their entire existence as conquerors, believing themselves untouchable. No one had ever dared march into the heart of the Dominion. Until now. Please, Voss pressed, his breathing uneven. I brought your message. The Dominion knows what happened. We will never return to your world. Voss tilted his head slightly. You think this is just about Earth? You think we're here because you picked the wrong planet? He let the words sink in, his tone dropping to something colder, sharper. You started a war. We're here to finish it. One of the warlords behind Voss stepped forward, a massive brute of a creature, his scaled fists clenched in fury. This is madness. You cannot possibly believe you can destroy us all. We are the Dominion. Voss's expression didn't change. The warlord bared his fangs. You think you're the first species to try and fight us? You're nothing. A single planet. A race barely out of its cradle. We have ruled the stars for centuries. Voss's smirk was almost amused. And yet, here we are, having this conversation after we gutted your invasion force and took your ships. Voss stepped between them, desperation creeping into his voice. Listen to me, Adrian Voss. If you do this, if you launch this attack, the galaxy will never see you as anything but butchers. This is your chance to end it without genocide. Voss's gaze didn't waver. You didn't give us that chance. You came to our world with one goal, extermination. Not conquest. Not war. You weren't looking for slaves or allies. You wanted us gone. Voss's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Because he knew it was true. Tell me something, Voss. Voss's voice was quieter now, but no less dangerous. How many civilizations begged you for mercy before you wiped them out? How many of their leaders made this exact plea while your warships burned their skies? Did you stop? His stare hardened. Did you show them mercy? Silence. Voss exhaled, sitting back. That's what I thought. The warlord behind Voss slammed his fist onto the table, his rage boiling over. Enough of this. If you dare strike our world, we will retaliate. We will hunt your kind across the stars. We will. Voss raised a hand, and the officer to his left pressed a button. The screen behind the warlords changed. Real-time footage. A Zilvrak-controlled colony world, burning. Human warships descended from the clouds, raining destruction onto military installations, tearing through orbital defenses like paper. The camera feeds flickered as planetary infrastructure crumbled. Then the feed switched, another colony. Another stronghold. Another world falling to the human fleet. One by one, the remaining Zilvrak-controlled planets were being wiped off the map. The warlord's breath hitched. The War Council froze, realization dawning in their eyes. The humans weren't threatening genocide. It had already begun. Voss's voice cut through the silence, final and absolute. You built an empire on blood. Now you'll drown in it. Voss's voice was almost pleading now. You don't have to do this. You've already won. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed, shaking his head. You still don't get it. He gestured to his officer. The warships opened fire. The Zilvrak homeworld's orbital defenses were the strongest in the Dominion. They lasted 5 minutes. Explosions rippled across the atmosphere, planetary shields buckled, war stations detonated in fireballs that lit up the blackness of space. The War Council erupted into chaos. Warlords screamed orders, desperate commands flying through panicked comms. None of it mattered. One by one, the capital cities of the Zilvrak homeworld vanished beneath waves of firepower, entire continents cracking under relentless bombardment. Voss stood frozen, his voice a whisper. Gods help us. Voss's expression didn't change. They won't. The final strike came from the planet killer cannons, a last gift from the stolen Zilvrak fleet. A blinding beam of light lanced from the lead warship, spearing straight into the planet's core. The Zilvrak homeworld shook. Then it died. Fire tore through its mantle, tectonic plates ruptured, magma spilled across the surface like the blood of an empire breathing its last. The warlords screamed. The transmission cut to static. And just like that, the Zilvrak Dominion ceased to exist. On the human flagship, the silence was absolute. Voss exhaled. Then, turning to his crew, he spoke one final order. Set course for Earth. It's time to go home.